A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
The conversation over this next hour, one of those ones you will want to lean in a little closer to the radio. You won't want to miss the finer points, especially if there are some sons, grandsons or nephews that are a part of your family. We're going to be talking boys, we're going to be talking men, and a special focus today on raising boys, the men of the future. Our special guest today is an authority on male sexual discipleship and spiritual integrity. He leads a global ministry and has impacted over 100,000 men in Australia. He says statistics show boys and young men need help navigating the challenging landscape on the road to manhood. He says their future relationships, the well-being of their future partners and their children depend on the guidance and support they receive today. Dr. Allan Meyer is co-founder of Careforce Lifekeys in Melbourne. He's renowned for his course called Valiant Man, designed to fortify and strengthen the moral and spiritual integrity of men. He wrote the book, From Good Man to Valiant Man, Sexual Integrity in a Sex-Crazy World. He is going to be one of the keynote speakers at the coming Breaking Chains Men's Conference that's on in September, 19th and 20th in Logan on the south side of Brisbane. He's on the preaching team at Stairway Church in Melbourne. He's on the eldership at Numa Church in Melbourne. And these days spends a lot of time travelling the world. And I might say a very special welcome back, Dr. Allan Meyer.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be with you this morning.
Hey, Allan, we all want to raise our boys to be good men. That means, I guess, having good character. We want them to be trustworthy. We want them to be good mates. We want them to be honourable. But that's not necessarily an automatic process, is it? It doesn't happen without some attention to some finer details. How do you reflect on that in an overall sense?
Yeah, it's a great question, Neil. The reality is what men grow up to be is of profound importance. We kind of live at the moment in a generation that wants to minimise or even eliminate any sense of distinctiveness between male and female, and that the whole gender issue is a real boiling pot of different ideas. But when one takes the Bible and then looks at real life, you have to face the fact that it's what men do, it's the way men behave, that is the critical factor at every level. In fact, one of the writers that I've appreciated a great deal is John Gottman. John and Julie Gottman are perhaps the most influential trainers of marriage counsellors and therapists in the world. And from 40 years of careful research in identifying the keys to successful relationships, writes in his latest book on this issue, what men do in a relationship is by a large margin the crucial factor that separates a great relationship from a failed one. That a woman doesn't need to do her part, but the data proves that a man's actions are the key variable that determines whether a relationship succeeds or fails. And the significance of how men grow is underlined by, just let me give you a couple of crime statistics from just one Australian state. 87% of homicides committed by men, 90% of robberies committed by men, 92% of abductions committed by men, 83% of non-sexual assaults committed by men, and 98% of sexual assaults committed by men. 19 men went to prison for every one woman, and on average, one woman died every week because of domestic violence. And the fact is that men feel the weight of this struggle in their lives. Men commit suicide at a rate of 4 to 1 compared to females. And why focus on boys? Because boys become men one day at a time. And what men become sets the tone for everything at every level in society. When men misbehave, women, children, communities, churches, families, everybody pays the price. And for that reason, working to help men develop and become the men that they are called to be is one of the most critical things in community life.
You know, those statistics, they are shocking statistics, aren't they? And, who knows how we might compare those with what men have been like in past generations. But the onus is on us here, Allan, to understand our boys so that we can be intentional about how we help to shape their behaviour. A time comes when those boys step out of our care and they're finding their own way. If you get it wrong early, you're going to miss the mark here, aren't you? You've got to start while they're young. How young is the ideal time, do you think?
Well, that's a great, that is a great question. I just love looking at the life of Jesus when it comes to that issue. I mean, the way the Jewish community raised their boys was that once a boy was weaned at the age of 3, he had tassels attached to his garments. And those tassels on his garments were to remind him he wasn't just a human being. He was a human being who was called to live under the guidance of Almighty God. So from the age of 3, a Jewish boy, Jesus, would have been raised with tassels on his garment from those early years. At the age of 5, he would be learning significant passages of the Bible. By the age of 13, he's introduced into manhood in his bar mitzvah, and the raising of boys in Jewish culture understood that you start from babyhood, you start from little children. And I guess the important thing that we need to appreciate with boys is that boys face different challenges to girls. Boys face different challenges in their own biology, and they face different challenges in their intellectual and emotional development. The reality is girls develop faster than boys. Boys face a number of challenges, and one of the things that I think both parents and boys themselves need to understand is what those challenges are, and the kind of coaching, I think might be a good word, the kind of coaching that boys need from the earliest years to develop well.
So there's coaching, and there's no doubt, pardon me, that role modelling that's in there. But let's just cut to the chase here, because I know you're not uncomfortable talking about these things. And for listeners, I don't know whether there's any little ears warnings. We're going to talk about some things quite openly here. Brain development, testosterone levels, sexual arousal, and controlling aggression. Are all of these things very much connected? And if you miss the point here, are you going to be letting your son down?
Profound questions, and I think, getting towards the bullseye right there, right off the bat. Again, our culture at the moment minimises the distinctives, the gender distinctives, and there's reasons for that. We understand that the whole patriarchal approach that kind of puts women in the background and fails to appreciate that women made in the image of God are every bit as brilliant, just better looking than the male version of humanity made in the image of God. The Second World War did a lot to perhaps strip away the thoughts that women can't do stuff. Women can fly aeroplanes, build aeroplanes. Women can make things. The Second World War threw them into roles that normally women were not permitted to do, and after the Second World War, they were not prepared to go back. Then, of course, the women's movement pushed for for justice for women, and rightly so. In so doing, the reality is that men have kind of lost their way. Men are beginning to wonder, what am I? What am I supposed to be doing? What am I? Who am I? What am I called to do and to be? And if you don't answer those questions, men will fundamentally give themselves to simply pursuing their own entertainment. They'll simply pursue pleasure as if the pursuit of pleasure is the meaning of life. And men need to understand, boys need to understand their significantly different physiological makeup and then be coached to manage that appropriately. And we can unpack that if you want.
We can, but when I hear you talking about these things, the question of identity comes to mind. Boys, and you're talking post-World War II, major changes that happened in that time, men losing their way. There's been an increasing secularization in our nation. People have moved away from God. They've thought that God is old hat, doesn't have anything wise to add to our modern world. Identity before God, where do you bring a spiritual dimension in here for men regaining something of that self-understanding of who they are before God, and therefore, a new, refreshed purpose?
Yeah, great question. Without a vision, people perish, and without a vision, people dwell carelessly. Life just happens, and it doesn't necessarily happen well. One of the things that I'm so grateful for, and I came across this when I was creating the Valiant Man course for adult men. The reason I created the Valiant Man course was that all through my life, I have watched men struggle. And then as I came into church leadership, I watched numerous leaders disqualify themselves and damage churches and families because of their mismanaged sexuality. They just didn't manage their sex drive well. And as a pastor, when you care about people and you begin to appreciate the areas in which they probably don't get a lot of coaching, you have to recognise that churches go back a decade or two, and the church was almost totally silent. I grew up in the midst of the sexual revolution. I grew up as a teenager in the 1960s, and I was a church-going kid. I never heard a single message on sex in 27 years of attending the church that I was going to. It was as if that was just an issue that we just never spoke about. And yet the culture was going through a profound transformation. And as a young man, the church had very little to say about that. And by the time I was leading a church, I realised these are big issues. In fact, the sex drive is one of the most profoundly influential factors at work in the decisions people make. They make really bad decisions when they haven't been coached with a vision for their sexuality and then the practice of their sexuality. And then you watched the pornography, the industry kick in through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And before we knew it, I was in the position of wanting to be able to coach men. And so I created the Valiant Man course as a discipleship course. And then that has actually kind of gone all over the world. What did I learn in that helped me a great deal? The first thing that I think I learned was there is in the Bible a vision for manhood. And the simplest thing in the very first chapters of the Bible, as God creates man, he gives him two simple Hebrew words to guide him in his responsibilities. And those two Hebrew words are Obad and Shema. And the word Obad means to work, to labour and to serve. And the second one means to guard and to protect. And that sums up a man's calling. And when a man realizes, young man, you're going to grow up to be a man, and as a man, God has for you a major calling in your life. He wants you to work, to labour and to serve, your sphere of responsibility. And if you get married and have children, God's going to ask you to work and to labour and to serve, and then he's going to ask you to guard and to protect. And then that spills out into perhaps a larger vision for manhood, which we can talk about as well.
This is 2020 with Neil Johnson, helping you make sense of life, culture and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 on Vision.
Hey, Allan, you're working in a program where it's called Vision for Manhood. Take us into some of these differences. What's so different about being a male to being female? Because at the moment, our culture has got some of these things very confused.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's not well understood, and it's insufficiently taught. In fact, most of the information that I came across I had never heard in my life until I was preparing the Valiant Man course. Because it was a doctoral program, and I had to do a full year of research and writing and having my writing passed as sufficiently accurate, etc. Through a group of readers. You do a lot of reading, you do a lot of research, and as a result, I heard things that I'd never understood or never heard before, and I couldn't help but think, why did my father not know this, and why did my father not tell me? Opened up the door to challenges of my own manhood, and it helped me then to create a course for men. Now, the significant difference between male and female is a single chromosome. A human being is the product of 46 chromosomes, and a chromosome is simply a band of DNA that is a prescription for the making of a human being. There's 46 of them in 23 pairs that make up the human genome, and the only difference between male and female is a single gene, which is either an X or a Y. Two X chromosomes make a female. An X and a Y chromosome is the recipe for a male. And as long as at the moment of conception, a man carries sperm that carry both X and Y chromosomes. And females carry eggs in their ovum that only carry X chromosomes. So girls are voting for another girl with every egg that they carry in their body. Males, on the other hand, carry in their sperm an X and a Y chromosome, and whichever wins the race, that is the determining factor as to how then that infant will unfold. And if the chemistry unpacks as it was intended by our Creator, adding an X chromosome to the egg is the recipe for a female. You add a Y chromosome to that egg, you've now got an X and a Y. There's the recipe for a male, and it is the Y chromosome that makes the difference. The Y chromosome, first of all, impacts the developing boy in the womb by reshaping the genitals. The two X chromosomes will result in the little gonads that are ovaries in a woman simply developing into the womb, and then the normal architecture of the female genitals. For a male, the genitals have to be completely rebuilt. And the Y chromosome results in those little genitals moving outward to where the vaginal lips expand to receive them and turn them into testicles. The clitoral pleasure center expands and becomes the penis. And over a number of weeks, the whole architecture of the male genitals are formed, and that's the first step in the making of a male. The second step then takes place in the child's brain. Around about the 15th or 16th week, it calls for a flood of androgens, male hormones, into the young developing boy's brain, and millions of cells and fibres dissolve and disappear. And the corpus callosum that connects the left and the right hemisphere of the brain together loses about 25 million fibres in the process, and a boy's brain is redesigned, or it is recrafted for masculine challenges. The girl's brain does not go through that process. The girl lives with a brain that has not been reformatted. A boy lives with a brain that has, and it influences every aspect of his developing life.
Okay, let's just let's get into this reformatting, because when we're talking about sex and sexuality, you mentioned a terminology I think we'll all relate to, a pleasure centre. So when does the pleasure centre in the male brain begin to be a whole lot different to the female brain?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that question, because I'm not sure what the research reveals in terms of the difference between the pleasure centres, but we do know that there are differences in the way the pleasure centre is accessed. For example, One of the results of the Y chromosome redesigning or impacting the structure of the male brain means that the major hormone involved in doing that is a hormone in a male for three major issues. First, for his sexual arousal. Secondly, it is responsible for the development of muscles, muscular development. Thirdly, it is responsible for the masculine response to risk, daring, and aggression. And the amygdala in the male, also as a result of the Y chromosome, is larger than it is in that of a girl. And that takes us to the question of brain, of just the function of the brain, which we'll get onto a little bit later. But one of the outcomes is this, that the developing brain of the boy has a connection from the eyeballs to the arousal center of the brain that results in a male being more instantaneously aroused by sight compared to that of a female. And we can thank God for that, because if the average woman was aroused primarily by what she sees, the average man would be finding it difficult to find himself a sexual partner, because the average man is not Brad Pitt, he's not a Brad Pitt lookalike. Males are profoundly impacted by what they see. And the connection from the eyeball to the optic nerve to the chemistry set in the brain that is responsible for sexual arousal in a boy results in instantaneous sexual arousal when something hits that structure in his brain that aligns with his love map. Something that he finds exciting. And it's why boys are more vulnerable to pornography than girls. And it makes him vulnerable through his eyeballs of being of objectifying women simply because of the pleasure that he gets by simply having a look.
Okay, so the shaping of this young brain in a boy on his journey to manhood, incredibly important here, bringing our Christian faith into that, because ethics and theology and how we shape a sex drive to the character of a good and godly man, this is where, if we haven't got some level of understanding of our own faith, passing anything like that on, a godly desire for manhood, or a good shaping of manhood, it's not going to be easy, is it?
No, it isn't, and it's one of the things I reflect on a lot. You see, I was raised in a different age. I was raised in an age where television didn't exist. I was raised in an age where pornography I didn't even know it existed. I was 18 years old before I saw a nudie photo when I was working in a quarry during my university vacation. I was raised in an environment where the hottest thing on television in my growing years was Disneyland or Gunsmoke. So the culture in which I lived. Now, fortunately, I lived in a home where my father loved my mother. We read the Bible around the table at night. My dad was a school teacher. We belonged to a Lutheran church, and my home cultural environment was one of stability and peace and kindness and love. The culture was not yet filled with images that were sexualized. And as a result, I grew up in a less pressured environment. Even so, because I was a male, I have the Y chromosome. From the earliest years of my growing boyhood, I'm aware of my attraction to girls.
Hey, Allan, we mentioned just before the news, you grew up in a different age. But as a parent, you can't give up on your son just because the technology has changed, can you? What has to change in the parenting style, in the home, to protect and shape your sons today?
It's very challenging for parents, but one thing we have to be very clear about, and that is that silence is not a discipleship strategy. If you're going to help your young men, it's got to be very deliberate. perhaps this was underlined for me. One of the reasons that the issue of moving my focus from adult men to the boys was as a result of a few years ago being invited to be engaged in a week-long community-wide anti-pornography thing in one of the country towns in Australia. And as a result of that, I spoke in 3 different Christian schools to all the boys in over a single hour. They gave me the boys from years 7 to 9 and then the years 10 to 12, and I'd get an hour with each of those groups. So I had 6 sessions with boys. And I began to appreciate in a new way how incredibly difficult it is for boys being raised in this generation. And I'll give you some insight into why that is so. As you and I grew up in a different age, pornography was not part of our diet. I've never had to deal with pornography because I just didn't grow up in that age. I was speaking to these boys, and at the end of one of those sessions, one of the boys, a 12-year-old boy, stayed behind, and he stood in front of me, and he said to me, "Is it too late for me?" Because I was speaking to them about the challenges that boys face between the ages of 10 and 14 in particular. And here's the challenge they face. Number 1, the pleasure centre of a boy's brain is 2 to 4 times more intense during those years than it will be as an adult. So anything he encounters that is thrilling will hit him 2 to 4 times, with 2 to 4 times more ferocity as a child than it will when he's older. So if you were to bump into pornography in your 20s, for today, that's just not going to happen. But it didn't happen for me until I was nearly 40 years old before I ever saw pornography. And by that time, I have a developed character and a developed pleasure centre that's not as explosive. And as a result, I didn't have to face the same challenge. But today, with a mobile phone in his pocket, a boy can pull out his mobile phone on the school ground in a Christian school at lunch break, and before you know it, kids can be standing there watching pornography that their parents would not even believe existed, and it hits them with a ferocity that just is overwhelming. Whatever gets connected to a boy's pleasure centre during these critical years of 10 to 14 will mould his character. Now, we don't have the time to go into that in any detail, but simply know it's true. So if a boy encounters pornography, and today we are discovering that kids as young as kindergarten age are encountering pornography and asking female workers in their kindergarten for sexual images because they're encountering it in their infancy, not just their childhood. The kid who's sitting in a pram as mum is going around a supermarket and he's occupied with his iPad can find himself with pop-ups that engage him with pornography at the age of 4 or 5 years of age. And when you deliberately take out your mobile phone in the school bus and offer the site to a 10, 11, 14-year-old boy, the impact on the pleasure centre of his brain is so ferocious that it sets him up he's going to have trouble not just with his sexuality, he's going to have trouble with his sanity because of the impact and the availability of pornography to a child.
Allan, these ages 10 to 14, what's so important for parents listening to our conversation today to appreciate about those 4 years? And I guess, there's going to be some flexibility around that, but 10 to 14, critical time in the shaping of your boys. What's so important here to focus on?
During those years, the brain explodes in terms of developing neuronal connections. So it's sending out branches in every direction. And anything that attracts a boy's attention, that has him repeating a behaviour over and over again because he finds pleasure in it, that track will be developed from a pathway into a road. If he continues to respond especially during those years, 10 to 14, Delta phos B is a protein in the brain that tracks dopamine, the pleasure center, and expands the connection to the pleasure center so that it turns it from a pathway to a road, from a road to a highway, and from a highway to a superhighway. So what gets attached to a boy's pleasure center in those critical years will rapidly expand into a major route in his brain. Then after the age of 14, the brain begins to prune away the branches that are not being used and then continues to develop the branches that are being used. And if pornography is one of those branches, sexualizing women is one of those branches that gets started in those early years of his brain development, and it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be gaming, it could be anything that produces a real hit in the pleasure center. That's what will develop over those years. And young boys get addicted to everything more rapidly than an adult and find it far more difficult to overcome that addiction than they would in their adult years. So watching and guarding what gets attached to the boy's pleasure center during those years is critical to his development. Let me give you a very simple story. Yeah. When I was 9 years old, I got my first job. I wanted a job. I wanted to earn my own money, and I discovered the thrill of payday. I loved the fact that I got a job delivering newspapers. That job's gone. That's another one that's no longer available. But I loved the thought of payday. Do you know what get connected to my pleasure center was the thought that if you work, you get paid. And if you get paid, you get to make good decisions. You get to make decisions with your money. I have never been out of a job all the days of my life because what got connected to my pleasure center in those early years was the thought that work has its reward. And as a result, I've never had to battle my brain to go to work. I love the idea of payday. And what parents need to be aware of, and boys themselves also, they need to realise how vulnerable they are during these years. And parents and youth leaders and coaches and grandparents need to be aware that what's getting secretly connected to their reward pathway is going to mould the brain with which they will have to live for the next 80 years of their life.
So shaping your son's pleasure centre is a key here. And, the idea of payday, I'm thinking, when we think fathers and sons, and let's not leave out of this that there are a lot of boys who are a part of single-parent families and they have a mum. That might be a whole different dimension here. But the shaping of our son's pleasure centre might be payday, but what about things like fishing and sport and motor racing, those sorts of things? Is this why father-son activity is so important? Because what's happening with the father and son is shaping your son's pleasure centre.
Oh, absolutely. You've nailed it there. That's absolutely true. And the difficulty with boys is that girls tend to develop their character in relationship to their mum. And they have a tendency to stay close to their mum. Boys develop their character by pulling away from their mum. They will begin to connect with other boys. And generally speaking, in life, dads just tend to not be as accessible as mums are. Again, a lot has changed in the way culture we do life with two parents working. I grew up in a home where my mum was a full-time mother. And as a result, you develop, as a boy, you develop by pulling away. We'd go down the river, we'd play golf, we'd dive for golf balls, we'd start fires, we had shanghais, we'd be trying to shoot rabbits. But you never did that with your dad because dad was at work. And as a result, other boys become very largely the culture in which a boy develops his manhood. Who your friends are become a profoundly important question for parents because who your boys' friends are will have a huge impact. Now, my friends happen to be golfers and cricketers and footballers, and so much of my boyhood was expended in harmless and relative experiences that was emotionally and mentally. Who your kids are relating to becomes a very critical factor. But if dads can deliberately begin to ensure that the relationship they have with their boys is healthy and warm and affirmative and kind and communicative, because that was the biggest thing I lacked with my father.
Hey, Allan, what do you say to the parent who says, my son, the horse is already bolted, and maybe he's over 14, maybe that shaping time is past and there's already a whole lot of exploration of sexuality and pornography is already a part of his life. It hasn't had your shaping. What do you say to the parent? Is it too late? How do you rescue a situation that maybe has gone bad and you want to get in and actually rescue that situation and start to retrain your brain? What do you do?
Hey, again, you ask really good questions. I'm taking a group of men through the Valiant Man program online at the moment. And this very week, we're up to that session called Retraining Your Brain. How do you do it? It is work. It's hard work. And it has to be done very deliberately. It's like any skill. If you want to develop the neuronal pathways that relate to any skill, there is only one way it can be done, and that is by practice. You have to practice. And let me underline to you also the significance of God's love at work in a person's life. One of the people I work with in my Valiant Man course is my brother Neil, and my brother Neil tells a story about how when he was in those early years, 10 to 14, he had a friend who taught him how to be rude to my father. Now, I never learned that. Even when I was 18 years old, I had a respect for my dad. Now, we weren't close, but I had respect. He taught my brother how to be rude, and as a result, he set up a hostility between him and my dad. By the time he was 15, he bailed from home, went off into the drug scene, and we didn't get back in touch till he was 21, and he'd been arrested by the Commonwealth Police for being in possession of a large amount of quantity of drugs. He came to Jesus as a result of that, but man, it was hard work. You got to face the fact that there is no easy process to retraining a person's brain. It's hard work, but he's done it. And he's done it because he became a follower of Jesus, got into an environment where he was surrounded by Christians, and then together they did the hard work. But it is hard work. And mum and dad, never, ever, ever give up on your kids. If you've got the opportunity to begin to influence them, there are just a number of resources that you can get that will help you nurture a closer relationship with your kids, because the greatest influence you'll ever have on your kids is through a warm, tender, and openly communicative relationship.
Hey, Allan, you've dispelled the myth that men are some ways just simple, not hard to understand what a man is like, get a few things right, make sure he's satisfied, his tummy's full, various things like that. Hey, let's talk women for a moment here, because women navigating the chaos of what might be going on in their son's brain, what might be going on in their husband's brain. When you talk to various groups, they're mixed groups, there's men and there's women there, what do you say to the women who start to understand some of the things that you're talking about with men?
That's exactly why I created the Valiant Man program, because I'm observing the suffering of women. What a man becomes from his boyhood into his manhood, women and children have to live with, and he has to live with it too. And one of the reasons why, men commit suicide at a far greater rate than women is that often they don't understand why they feel so unhappy with themselves. They don't have a vision for their manhood, so they're not sure what they're supposed to be focusing on. And in their despair, as they begin to despair of themselves as human beings, they have a tendency to give up. And when a man gives up, that's a very dangerous moment. What do you say to women? Well, it's important to understand this. that one of the most, if a woman is married to a man and she realizes she's living with a guy and the way his thought life works is creating chaos for everybody, the greatest thing that she can do is love him enough to try to get him some help. Men do not tend to go looking for help themselves. One of the things that women do is they look for help. We see this in the courses we run. If we run a man-to-man course or a woman-to-woman course, 3 times as many women will sign up for the woman-to-woman course as compared to the man-to-man course, because men don't go looking for help. They struggle, but they don't look for help. They don't go to the doctor. They don't make an appointment with a psychologist or a psychiatrist. They tend not to turn up in the pastor's office and say, can you help me? Women have a tendency to do that. They just are socialized a little differently. So the best thing a woman can do is love him enough to seek to get him help. And often that's why men come to do my Valiant Man course, because a woman will say to him, I can't live with this any longer. You have to get help. And she'll urge him, provoke him. Many times men will say, I'll ask the men, why are you here doing the course? And a man will say, because my wife made me. And she sees the need and she just provoked him to get help. And that's just realistic. Girls have a tendency to seek it out. Men have a tendency to need someone to help them seek it out.
Well, there's an opportunity here. The Breaking Chains Men's Conference coming up September 19th and 20th at Hope Centre in Logan, Kingston Road, Slacks Creek in Queensland. Lots of dimensions there. You'll hear Dr. Allan Meyer as a keynote speaker, but there's other dimensions too, including great input on entrepreneurism and dealing with struggles and doubts and how to avoid wasting years being a failed dad and husband. Make a note of that. There is a website, breakingchains2025.com, for listeners who want to be a part of that. Other than that, you can hear Allan talking very passionately and just how valuable these courses are. You'll be able to explore all sorts of things. And we were talking about Valiant Man. There's also a course called Young Valiant Man. And you can also look through some things there to do with the vision for manhood that Allan's been working on. The website there is careforcelifekeys.org. careforcelifekeys.org. I mentioned it's now a global ministry. It's focused on discipleship, on healing, evangelism and church health, and there's some powerful dimensions there. Always appreciate talking to you, Allan Meyer. I know there'll be a bunch of people wanting to be a part of that conference, but also getting a hold of some of these resources. I know listeners will be able to appreciate just how valuable they are. I want to appreciate you very much and thank you for taking some time to share these thoughts with listeners today on 2020.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Been great to be with you. God bless you all.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.